Welcome to Around the World with Dane Waters, and I am your host, Dane Waters. It's always a pleasure to be here. So let's talk about the world. Listen, I talk a lot about Mother Nature, and we overlook Mother Nature. There's so much conflict around the world, but we can't ignore her. I mean, like all women, when they're in a bad mood, they're in a bad mood. And there was just another earthquake in the Philippines, 7.8 magnitude, and um, I just there's been several over the last 6 months, and I tell you, we just have to pay attention to what Mother Nature is telling to us. And maybe she's telling us, hey, we need to calm down, and we just don't need all these conflicts around the world. So, just that's number one. Number two is, there was a meeting yesterday in the UK between Starmer, Zelensky, President of France Macron, and President Chancellor of Germany Schultz. The reality of the situation is that probably Starmer's not going to be around much longer, and Macron's going to be out of office because of term limits. And if you look at whether it's the UK and Germany and France, they have been the strongest advocates in support of Zelensky. So the question is, what happens when two of the major supporters of Ukraine are gone? So we need to be paying attention to that. Iran, I mean, once again, ups and downs. We'll talk about that a little later in the show. But the reality is, I just don't see that conflict ending anytime soon. And I'm going to ask, I mean, I've asked this several times. I would like for the President of the United States to articulate what is the ultimate goal. I mean, it's kind of been all over the map. First of all, I 100% agree that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon, 100%. And we have to do whatever is necessary to ensure that that doesn't happen. But we also have to make sure, I think that ultimately we need to figure out how to bring regime change there. But listen, this war is going on. It's impacting the world globally and economically and every other way. We need to get a clear understanding of what that conflict is going, how it's going to be resolved. And the last thing I want to talk about is elections in the United States. We have the midterm elections coming up. The Democrats are doing quite well. I mean, President Trump walked out of an interview with NBC News yesterday talking about how that the California election has been stolen. Listen, I'm a strong believer in election integrity. I support strongly the reality that there needs to be, proof of identity, and only citizens should be able to vote in elections anywhere in the world. But at the same time, the President of the United States needs to show proof if he's going to make an accusations like that. So once again, it's about proof. Say what you feel. I strongly believe that, but let's not, mislead the American public and the global public. The President of the United States has access to all the information in the world, so prove these accusations if he's going to make them. Anyway, let's take a quick break from Around the World with Dane Waters, and we'll be back with our first guest. Thanks a lot. Welcome back to Around the World with Dane Waters. I continue to be your host. They haven't fired me yet. Of course, I mean, I don't know. I've got to take a pay cut of 0 to 0, but we'll see. Anyway, I'm very honored to have back with us Jonathan Berry, and I'm going to read this title. Jonathan was the Parliamentary Undersecretary of State for Artificial Intelligence and Intellectual Property. Big title, but for a big man, so that's very important. So, Jonathan, thanks for being with us today.
Delighted to be back with you, Dan.
So, we've spoken before about AI. We talked about the political implications and a whole host of things. But since we had the chat, the Pope came out with a statement, and actually it's more than a statement, but a long report, I guess, for lack of a better term, about his concerns about artificial intelligence. How would you address that?
So I think that there are two things that kind of leap out for me as artificial intelligence. One of his points, I think, hits home very hard and well, which is, I mean, it's not a commercial point or a strategic point, but it's a point that goes very much to the heart of what it is to be us, to be human beings, which is to say that intelligence is surely about more than the practicalities of getting stuff done or of solving problems. There is more to us than what artificial intelligence is being designed to imitate or recreate for its own self. We're in danger when we talk a lot about artificial intelligence replacing human beings in various functions. His point is that we are in danger of grossly undervaluing what it is to be human and what it is inside of us. And I'm personally very touched by this point. I think it is an important thing to say, that we really must continue to focus on our own humanity. So that aside, and I'm not sure this takes up a great deal of space in our various debates and how we think about artificial intelligence, but it is worth bearing in mind that we are, complex indeed, if you can tolerate the word spiritual beings, that and we impoverish our view of ourselves, excuse me, by thinking about ourselves in the wrong way like that. That's the first point. The second point was, I think he joined this call for, yet again, we have this raised of we should have a moratorium on AI development. Everybody stop until we get a handle on how we're going to regulate this thing and keep it safe. Now, I don't think that is possible. In fact, I'm absolutely certain that that is impossible, and therefore we distract ourselves by pursuing that. I think we have to look at other ways of keeping ourselves safe, but a moratorium simply isn't going to happen.
Well, I appreciate that. I do agree. With the Pope, just like you. I mean, we have to be very careful not to, once again, allow AI diminish who we are as individuals and as human beings. I mean, that's one thing we can't lose sight of that. But to your point about the safety of AI, I mean, I saw a report the other day. I can't remember if it was from whether it was from ChatGTP or OpenAI or whatever, but talking about how soon AI will be teaching itself. I mean, what do you make of that?
So yeah, I mean, absolutely fascinating, and of course this was, if you go back to the days of Ray Kurzweil and the singularity and how each generation of technology builds on itself and the time it takes to build on itself gets shorter and shorter. Self-teaching recursive AI of this kind is absolutely, you know, the foothills of the singularity. So there's that to bear in mind. I'm not saying we're necessarily there. The other thing that really is important to bear in mind in these, let's face it, rather febrile times, is that every single person making a public pronouncement on AI, whether they are, bigging up the possibilities of any one AI implementation or bigging up the safety concerns of AI, every single person is deeply incentivized to overstate the capabilities of AI. So we have to bear that in mind when we think about all of these things. I'm not saying that we aren't in a stage of very, very serious advancement of AI beyond all previously imagined capabilities. But I'm saying, we've got to be careful not to take necessarily at face value every pronouncement that's made on the subject.
I think it's very important to say that because both OpenAI and Anthropic are up for public offerings.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
yeah. So
So,
maybe
yeah.
that announcement is just talking about, hey, it's talking about the growth of it and the potential of it. I mean, that probably makes those two companies worth more. I mean, so you're saying that you think that some of those statements may be along the lines of helping the public offering, you think?
Uh, well, it never occurred to me, but now you mention it. Um, yeah, I mean, look, the other thing that it appears to me is more and more the case is that there is a growing difference between what is known inside the AI labs and what is known outside the AI labs. It really is difficult to to get a clear handle on what the genuine possibilities are of existing tech and imminent releases of tech. So I mean, one of the worrying things, I suppose, for all of us, is we just don't know really what's coming, and we've been through, over the last year or so, a bunch of quite disappointing releases. GPT-5 was meant to be AGI. I mean, it's not really, is it? Um, so it will come, but I think we have to factor in the competition. Um, And the competition is I mean, it's a very interesting thing to kind of think about the incentives around the competition because it's a very strange set of incentives. So if you think, all right, there is a level of AI capability, let's call that level X, at which AI becomes dangerous to us as a species and out of our control. Okay, so that's the sort of X is the danger point, and I realize this is desperately crude, but bear with me. So there's an optimal point of AI, which is again desperately crude, 0.99x, right? That's when AI is kind of maximally useful, but not going to kill us. Now, we would all in normal circumstances share the incentive of okay, let's get to 0.99x and then we'll all be happy, but let's not get to x itself because then we'll all be dead. Now, but we don't have shared incentives because the other feature is that, again, very crudely, at about 0.8x, whoever gets there first suddenly achieves overwhelming and uncatchable strategic commercial advantage, military advantage. The nation or the company that gets to 0.8x first is the absolute winner of the AI game, and that is a winner take all situation. So we're in this sort of slightly odd, well, desperately odd situation of competing with each other on getting to 0.8x, but having very aligned incentives on not getting to x itself. And I think that is a very weird and difficult situation to be in. And it means, among other things, that we are never going to agree on a moratorium globally on pausing AI because the prize of getting to 0.8x is so great and so much to be competed for that the participants are willing to take the risk of total species destruction in order to get there. There you go.
Well, I like the analogy, and the other thing is that you think about, I crudely, to use your phrase, crudely, I crudely break the world down into good guys and bad guys, right? So you have the good guys, and like the West, the UK, US, and in theory, who in theory are supposed to look out for the world's best interest, right? Um, Developing AI, and then you got the bad guys, which I will put for China, Russia, North Korea, and others, who don't necessarily have the global, the people around the world best interest involved. So how do and so this call for the moratorium about, which I agree with you is never going to happen, but this call for the moratorium, you have individual states in the United States trying to pass regulations on AI and the development of AI, but I agree, even though on one hand I don't want us to get to X, and I want there to be in the good world people trying to not let us get to X. But how do we? But if we do that, we're allowing the bad people, the evil people, to get to X because they're not going to be beholden to anybody. So it is an arms race, really. I mean, it really is an arms race.
It is a very quick arms race, very fast race. The other factor in there is that again, accepting your categorization of people as good or bad, I think there does seem to be a feature where you can start with very good intentions, but in order to pursue your ends, you can. There are a lot of ways in which you might just dip a toe into the bad pool. So I think particularly if you look at the earlier developments and intentions of both OpenAI and of DeepMind, both of these organizations started very clearly with the best and most altruistic of intentions, which becomes something on the lines of, oh well, look, if somebody's going to develop AGI, it had better be me because I'm a good guy. And along that journey, you don't necessarily remain a good guy. And I'm not casting aspersions at any individual, but the kinds of competitive pressures that are going to hit you are are not such that you can remain angelic, to use the Pope, a term that the Pope might prefer. So you do get into quite morally complex areas, like, okay, how much of my personal goodness and ethical behavior would I be willing to sacrifice in order to be the first one to hit 0.8x? And I don't have to be an angel, I just have to be better than any of my competitors, and so on. And so, I mean, you take the point about, you don't necessarily stay on the straight and narrow path as you go on this journey.
Yeah, exactly. And so so based on all that, where do you think what do you think government's role is in this? To regulate, not regulate, let the free market work?
No, I think, okay, so point one is you have to regulate. And that's, I don't mean regulate to prevent innovation and all that. I think, first of all, most businesses would really welcome the clarity of regulation, if assuming the regulation is wise. Second, I think uh, countries, jurisdictions tend to go into their comfort zone of developing regulations for their own jurisdiction, because that's what they're good at and that's what they're there to do. But that's pretty useless in terms of AI. I mean, even the US, even China, I doubt there are many AI products. In fact, I know there are no AI products that have a value chain entirely based in any one country. Any implementation of AI at any kind of scale is by definition a global product. It has hardware, the just the semiconductors are going to come through Taiwan at some point, and the machines that build them are going to go through the Netherlands at some point, and the design of all of those bits of hardware is going to come through other countries, including the UK, and so on and so on. So, my point being that if you are going to regulate AI, that to some extent has to be a global set of regulations. Now, an awful lot of international bodies have recognized this quite rightly and go, okay, let's step up and let's be the one to to regulate AI globally. But unfortunately, there's far too many of them, and nobody knows who to pay attention to. So, there's various branches of the UN, there's GPAI, there's the G20, there's the G7, there's and there's the whole alphabet soup of people having very constructive and interesting global meetings all over the place, but nobody is conducting the orchestra. So I would say there's a reasonably attainable priority, which is to say, okay, let's all agree a single body or governance that we can all get behind and design a set of principles for the governance of AI globally. And then that means that other countries can then put in place their own laws and whatever they want, that respond to those international laws. But we need to have a basic set of international laws that everybody signs up to, and that gives us the confidence that we can then proceed in safety towards our most welcome AI utopia. That if safe, would be deeply wonderful.
Well, yeah, I agree. There needs to be those international rules and regulations, but then we also live in a world where that a law is only as good as those people wishing to follow it. And this is the issue. I mean, we have countries like the United States pulling out of international treaties. We have the UN, which has lost its way in so many ways. I mean, but I agree. I mean, this is AI. I mean, I love AI. I use it every single day. You know, it's not to X with me yet. But it scares the hell out of me. It absolutely scares the hell out of me about where it can go. And so there has to be, some people, who's smarter than I am, who has more clout than I am, than I do, to try to figure out this. On a business standpoint, it's interesting. I was reading a story yesterday, about how Apple is, really behind in the AI race. What do you think about that?
Yes, I mean, I've heard that. I mean, it's slightly surprising, isn't it? Because I mean, they were trying to get into it very early with Siri. It seems to be the kind of product that would absolutely enhance the experience of using Apple products. So it is surprising that they've fallen behind. I mean, maybe they're just a company that's better at hardware than software. I don't know. Um, I think if you look at the experience of their great rivals, Google, who perhaps recognized that they too were going to fall behind absent an acquisition, made the unbelievably smart decision to acquire DeepMind, and as a result are very strong participants in the AI race. So I don't know, maybe Apple just missed the boat, or maybe they take a view that we don't have to be leaders in the AI race, but we do have to be, you know, followers, so that our devices can implement the AIs developed by other people, and that might be one of the principal ways people get to experience AI in future, would be my guess. But I have a strong feeling that the senior people at Apple will be worried about having missed the boat now.
Yeah, I agree. And well, so let's take this. At the top of the show, I talked about Mother Nature, a little bit, and how Mother Nature wants to right the wrongs of humanity when she can. Let's talk about the environmental impact of AI. It's something we didn't really touch on last time we chatted, because there was this here in the UK. Actually, I saw a report the other day about the need, how much water itself is needed, because of how much power is needed for AI. I mean, what do you make of this whole environmental impact of AI?
Yes, and I've got a feeling, and I haven't sort of fully digested it yet, but I just saw mentioned this morning of a report in The Guardian of how many US data centers are actually being built in zones that experienced drought last year. So, and I'll need to verify that. I'm not sure. So, yes, it is concerning. Yes, it is an unbelievable drain on the development of compute, which currently, for current approaches to developing AI, is the absolute critical gating factor. Um, but I, by the way, often run with myself a thought experiment, which is, okay, what happens if or when somebody develops a form of AI that requires much less data and much less compute? What does that then look like? So I think environmentally, that looks brilliant, because we can stop paving over the entire countryside with data centers that cost a lot of money and drain a lot of water. Um, in business terms, that would be very, disruptive, because suddenly all of these vast, highly capitalized plants would be very large paperweights. Um, so, and by the way, I don't think it's a remote possibility. Low compute, low data, AI implementations. In fact, I think it's the next 2 or 3 years. I'd say it's up there with decent outside bet. So it is a very odd situation that we find ourselves in as a species, plowing so much capital into building these strange buildings, these human unfriendly buildings all over the place, that for the time being are incredible drains on energy supplies, incredible drains on water supplies. that may stop being necessary at some point. And even if they don't stop being necessary at some point, are certainly going to be obsolete um, at some very definite point. So um, it goes into this big mental category I keep called AI is weird, and that's one of the weirder aspects of it.
Well, it's interesting because it's like if we think about original computers, computers would take up the original computers would take up building after building after building, and all that computing power is now just down into what we can have in our laptop. So I think you're spot on to think that, okay, yeah, now we're building all these huge data centers, but somebody eventually is going to create something that's going to reduce that down to the point where we don't have to have all these data centers. And I was speaking to a guy the other day who's they're building data centers on the moon or something like that,
Yes, in
or
orbit. In orbit, I think is a good bet. Yeah.
yeah, and I don't know how they're getting water to that one, but and also in the United States, one of the issues between some of the states, like if you're in Arizona and Colorado, there's always been these fights over the water from the Colorado River. Now, there are greater water needs for these plants that are being built in the middle of the desert, as you're talking about. I mean, I think we're going to see in the United States some fights over water rights again because that's going to be even a more valuable commodity. Um, let's talk about the social impact. I mean, we talked about the economic impact before, but there's also now I know that some of the AI I go to, starts asking me for my age, to verify my age and all this kind of stuff. And then there's been some debate about how AI has caused some people to commit suicide. I mean, what do you think about AI and its social and emotional impact?
So look, yes, there are definitely cases where chatbots are driving appalling outcomes. People who are using AI as their girlfriend slash boyfriend. People then escalate to using AI as their psychotherapist. I mean, mind boggles. To even some people who have gotten to a point where um, they ask AI to be their deity, which is probably not very healthy. But I think these are edge cases for the time being. I think there are other much more pervasive social problems that will come with AI, which is it absolutely removes the cognitive load from humans, and whenever you ask AI a question, you're saving yourself a load of effort, but it also it prevents you from learning, and this does seem to be quite well established by neuroscientists and cognitive psychologists. The impact on us is probably quite poisonous. It's going to make us quite lazy. So you could argue, okay, fine, we're going to need different kinds of thinking in order to thrive in future. But meantime, the social impact of pretty much everybody avoiding the necessity to think, I suspect is going to be very great. I mean, the quality of people in top jobs is going to diminish, without some sort of steps to retain our ability to think critically.
And it's interesting, like I find myself almost every day when I'm having a debate with somebody and they say, well, this isn't true or this is true or whatever. I find myself saying, hey, Google, can you answer this question for me? And as Google is now listening to me, don't respond. Just a second. Don't respond. Let me turn it off here. That's the problem. You can say something and it responds to you. And so I find myself getting lazy not to do my own research, not to
And it
really check
flatters you,
things.
right? It flatters you. So he goes, gosh, Dane, what a great question. And you put it so clearly. You know?
No, I agree. I agree. Luckily, I haven't had to ask, AI to be my date yet. But you never know. But the downside of that also is that AI is not 100% accurate, and so it will spout out information, and there's this tendency to just, oh, AI said that, Google said that, so therefore it has to be real. But one thing we have to remember is that we still, as human beings, have to fact check what AI is telling us, right?
And I mean, and that on a chatbot, that's fine. And we can, we can all sort of, at least theoretically, we can all check whatever we're being told. But AI, other applications of AI, an AI surgical robot, we can't tolerate an error rate at all. I mean, it has to be 100% correct. Even, an AI servo droid that's going to bring you a cup of coffee, if one time out of 50 that it brings you its cup of coffee, it spills it on your carpet, you'll not be very pleased. So, I think the error rate, which is tolerable in some forms of AI, is completely intolerable as we go forward. And if you're going to start using AI more in weaponry, watch out because there are going to be some very nasty mistakes.
Yeah, and that's what concerns me, especially when AI starts teaching itself and making decisions on its own, and especially when it comes to war. About I don't know. It's scary, and
Yeah.
I don't believe in over government regulation, but I do believe this is one of those areas that I hope humanity can get together and do what's right. So
Well, look, I wouldn't be too optimistic on that front. I'm sorry to say. I mean, if you go back to the wonderful Max Tegmark's book, which must have been 10 years old, which is, I think, the future of life or something, whatever he calls it, or life 3.0. One of his arguments is, look, we should never have killer robots. That is axiomatic. Everybody agreed, yeah, quite right. We should never have killer robots. But suddenly, the reality is that we've all been tempted, and we all go, oh well, my enemy has killer robots. Of course, I'm going to have killer robots, and on they go. And I'm afraid we are perhaps not equipped as a species to prevent ourselves following the incentives that drive us towards ever more lethal killing machines with an ever diminishing role of a human in the loop.
well, on that positive note, listen, Jonathan. Sadly, we're out of time, but I greatly appreciate the time that you spent, and I look forward to having you again on the show in the future. So
Lovely.
thanks a lot.
All the best. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's take a quick break from Around the World with Dane Waters, and we will be with our next guest. Thanks.